Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a very special video because we're going to do a Perfumers portfolio video, which we have not done in a long time, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. It's been a while since we've done one of these. And this is going to be a triple threat because we're going to do 3 perfumers in one. And the reason we're going to do 3 is because each one of these perfumers only has 2 bottles in my collection. And so if you've been following my channel, you know that this episode, this series of episodes, was really to kind of highlight and honor and, give a little bit of an applause to the perfumers who, in the 70s and 80s and really into the 90s were really far in the background. It wasn't until Frederick Malle launched his brand and started putting the perfumers' names on the boxes and on the bottles, where they really started to get more recognition. Before, they were, in fact, there's a story that really turned Frederick Malle's life into where it ended up going, in that in the 80s, he was at the launch of Dior Poison, and they didn't even give credit to, I believe it was Edward Fleischier, I could be wrong. I wasn't prepared for that one. Let's see, who did Poison? It was Edward Fleischier. Okay, and Jean Guichard. I'm probably butchering those, but you get the idea. The perfumers were not even invited to the launch of their own fragrance. How crazy is that, right? I know I've told that story before, but it's a fantastic story, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do these videos. I wanted to kind of highlight the people behind the scenes, if you will. And I've gotten some good feedback on it. In fact, one of the videos I did was on Nathalie Lorson. She reached out to me and said, hey, I watched the video. Thank you so much. It was humbling, and, it was great to see how much you love my work and my creations. Something small like that sometimes can go a long way, right? And so this one's going to be on 3 perfumers that, a lot of the big names I've already done. You can go back and you can read or you can watch the videos on Pierre Bourdon and Jean-Claude Elena and, on and on and on. Just all the big names I've pretty much knocked out. And so I still want to continue to do these videos because I still want to give these perfumers credit. And these are 3 amazing perfumers with great stories behind them and fantastic fragrances. But they don't have, 10, 15 in my collection. There's only 2. So I still wanted to highlight them, but not just do a video with 2. So I figured I would combine them. And these are going to be old school perfumers. Well, what I think of as old school perfumers, in that these perfumers really hit their stride in the 70s and 80s. In fact, I think all of these bottles are from the 70s and 80s. I don't think there's anything from the 90s in here or beyond. But before we do that, as is tradition on Channel Ramsey, we're going to do a scent of the day. And I'm going to talk about this fragrance. If you watch my videos regularly, you know that I did an unboxing yesterday on this fragrance. I had to wear it today. I just couldn't. It was just staring at me. And, I wanted to make sure, number one, it was legit, which I could tell from the atomizer it was. But I wanted to spray it and wear it and make sure everything was on the up and up. And it is perfect. So thank you, Donald, for the bottle. It is fantastic. It came perfectly wrapped, well, protected in shipping. And it's exactly what you said it was. So thank you very much. I would definitely work with you again. But here is the bottle. This is Arise Ladore's War and Peace. And Russian Adam was kind enough to comment on the unboxing video yesterday. There's the notes. Basically, it is Himalayan amber, which he says is 35 million year old amber resin. They can date this somehow. Although I'm not 100% sure on the process, but there is a way to date how old the amber is. There's Indian rose, Taif rose, Indian patchouli, Orris absolute, Siberian deer musk absolute, real deer musk, ambergris absolute, real ambergris, castoreum absolute, which I think is actually It says castoreum made by Russian Atom, so I don't think it is the synthetic. I think it's real castoreum. Indian oak moss, Java vetiver absolute. The civet is synthetic. It actually says synthetic civet, but I still like the synthetic civet. And I love the way it's used here because it is an animalic fragrance. From the very beginning, you're hit with this animalic type smell. But to me, it's a very wearable, and the animalic ingredient, you know how some animalic fragrances, they hit hard in the first couple minutes and then they subside? This one somehow, Russian Atom has found a way to keep the animalic fragrance smell going in the background. It's almost constantly there. It never goes away. And I just, it's like it's like watching a beautiful slow motion, waterfall. You just, everything just flows perfectly. The fragrance is fantastic. The ingredients are amazing, top-notch ingredients. And I'm just sitting here. I mean, I've had it on for, a couple hours now, and it's Saturday morning, so I don't have to work, and I'm just sitting here just enjoying the beauty of War and Peace. And, the fact that the animalics never leave the fragrance kind of in the background, it almost made me think, I was thinking of the War and Peace theme, and it made me think a little bit about the fact that maybe even during times of peace, there is that threat of war when you're talking geopolitical events, or if you're a nation, you have to prepare for war even during the good times. That's just the way it is with the world, is the way I think of it. And it reminded me a little bit about that, because even though there's so many beautiful notes in this fragrance just on their own without the animalics, there's that constant, reminder of the animalics, that even when times are good, war is always possible in human nature, right? And this fragrance is just so beautifully artistic. I feel so blessed to have found a bottle. They're impossible to find. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you have not watched my Russian Atom interview, go watch it. I think it's probably the best thing I've ever put up on YouTube, the most important thing I've ever put up on YouTube. Russian Atom's words ring very true with so much of what he said, and he's one of the most humble human beings you'll ever meet. He doesn't pump his chest out and say, look at me. He always gives credit to his family that helps him, and the people that helped him along the way, and he's just an amazing human being. So go watch that interview if you have not. I've watched it multiple times already. So, let's go through some of these fragrances, and we're going to start with a perfumer who you're probably familiar with if you read the Ghost Perfumer book. There was a little bit of talk about her because she is the ex-wife of Pierre Bourdon, and her name is Françoise Caron. And she was actually born to a family in Grasse, and her family was involved in the raw trade of perfume materials, if you will. And on top of it, she is the sister of Olivier Cresp. Okay, so she's Olivier Cresp's sister. She went through training. Olivier Cresp, as you all know, did famously Angel for Thierry Mugler. And Olivier Cresp actually did the reformulation of Edmond Rudnitska's Rochas Femme in '89, because Rochas Femme is a fragrance from the 40s. And Olivier Cresp was, almost tapped on the shoulder, and he was willing to take on that amazing responsibility. And she actually trained at the Roar, and she worked with she was in basically the training class with Pierre Bourdon, so that's how they kind of quote unquote fell in love. But Pierre Bourdon and Françoise Caron were married for a little bit. They ended up being divorced. But I have two fragrances in my collection from her. But I want to read a little bit of an article. There was a Fragrantica article that got put up on her back in 2010. If you actually Go to her fragrances, click on her name, the article will pop up, and there's some interesting quotes here. First of all, it mentions the fact that she's a very private person. Okay, so when you think about these perfumers, some of the ones that are in the rock star mentality, they do kind of pump their chest out and look at me and I'm the best and that kind of stuff. She's the opposite. She's very private. Although we may see her as a rock star because of her creations, she doesn't see herself that way. She doesn't brandish herself about the world that way. And they ask the question, is it because she's a woman mostly working in what used to be a very male-dominated profession, right? And remember, the fragrances we're talking about with her are not modern fragrances. We see a lot of women nowadays in perfumery. Amouage's newest creation is Cécile Zarokian, famous woman perfumer. And so they are becoming more and more prevalent in the perfume world. But in the 70s and 80s, it was still kind of like a good old boys club. But she was born in Grasse, the heart of the fragrance world. Grasse is like the capital of the fragrance world. And it says that, without wanting to generalize, Françoise believes that men and women perform differently in perfume as well as anywhere else. And it says, being a woman, she perceives her work as more instinctive, quicker, and less competitive on the whole. She says men are greater perfectionists in her experience, but traveling, places, memories, the beauty of raw materials, and even dreams can inspire and ignite passions which can be transformed into arresting compositions. I mentioned she was born in Grasse. And she has a quote here that says, her fate was sealed from an early age, that her father always dreamt of having his children become perfumers because he thought it was a magnificent profession. And she went through her 3-year training program at the Ruhr, as I said. And in 1979, she created L'Eau d'Orange Verte for Hermès, which I've actually never smelled. It was actually originally called something different. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Oh, Eau de Cologne de Hermès. It was called Eau de Cologne de Hermès. And then in 1997, they changed the name to L'Eau d'Orange Verte. I've never smelled that one. That is definitely on my to sniff list. Sometimes they will put little bottles of L'Eau d'Orange Verte in like fancy hotel rooms or stuff like that. If you stay at a 5-star hotel, they'll put little toiletries from Hermès in there. And so let's talk about some of the fragrances in my collection from her. The first one actually got a little bit of limelight in Fragcom in the last week or two, because there was a discussion on Mr. Smelly's stream, and the discussion was around vintage fragrances that aren't hyped, okay? That you still get amazing value for, but aren't hyped. So you're not going to pay $1,000 Patou Pour Homme prices. And one of the guests had mentioned that he prefers this over Patou Pour Homme. And this is called Charles Jourdan Un Homme. Charles Jourdan Un Homme. Now, Charles Jourdan Un Homme came out in 1981. And I absolutely love the bottle and the packaging. I think Charles Jourdan as a fashion house ended up kind of falling apart in the 90s. So the 80s were the decade where it was a popular fashion house. You can see it's a 50 ml there. And this little cap is kind of cool. So you pop it up like this. It pops up. And then it actually turns into a twist cap. So you know it's on, which I like with a splash. I hate those where you can pick it up and the cap just almost immediately comes off. This is absolutely stunning. And it is in her line. It is in her DNA. You can smell a little bit of her DNA in this and the next fragrance I'm going to talk about. But even though this and Patou Pour Homme are two fantastic fragrances, they are different in the way they operate. I wouldn't compare the two as far as similarity goes. I understand what they were saying. They were basically saying that the value that you get here, if you can find a bottle of this for $100, you're going to get much better bang for your buck than $1,000 Patu Pour Homme. You're still getting something from the early 80s. This came out in 81. And so you're still getting that 80s quality before IFR came in and before, you know, the world population exploded to a point where they couldn't use the high-end ingredients just in mass-produced designers. But what really sticks out about this one to me is the beautiful anise note. If you're a fan of anise, now anise got very popular in the late 70s with Azzaro Pour Homme. And this is discontinued, by the way, unfortunately. But if you're a fan of that sharp, bracing anise note, I talked about, there's a fragrance by Aramis, and it's called Tuscany per Uomo. That has a beautiful anise note too, and that came a couple years after this. So you had Azzaro Pour Homme in 78, you had Charles Jourdan Un Homme in 81, and then you had Tuscany per Uomo in the mid-80s. And so anise was a note for men that was very popular. It's sharp, it's bracing, it really announces your presence, right? And Charles Jourdan Un Homme, you can see I've had this bottle for a few years, and barely have I made a little bit of a dent. And part of that is probably even in a decant sitting somewhere. So, you know, I wish I had more bottles, but when I look at the tiny amount that I use, do I really need 2, 3, 4 backup bottles? Probably not. I mean, I'll go through this and use it and enjoy it and then move on to something else. But it has this, you know, there's this mixture of woody and spicy and fresh and anise. It does feel a little bit like a fougere. I don't know if it would be classified as a proper fougere, but it does feel a little bit like it has fougere elements to it. There is a lovely carnation note, but the way that she uses lavender is stunning. I love the way that she uses lavender. It's this, you know, blend, this mixture, this cross-section of lavender it's almost like it's spliced. The lavender is spliced perfectly with the other herbal, woody, spicy, masculine ingredients, you know. There is patchouli here, but it's not the in-your-face, heavy patchouli. It's playing its role as part of the composition. There's beautiful oak moss in the base. There's leather. There's tonka, because I think it does lean fougere. So it's got the fougere, you know, DNA. It has the lavender. It has the geranium. It has the tonka bean. So I think you could call this a proper fougere, if you will. But there's something special about it. And if you like these type of fragrances, if you are a fan of fougères, which there are a couple fougères that are going to be listed in this list, I would highly recommend grabbing a bottle of this before prices do start to go up, because we're in this interesting time in the fragrance world where vintage is obviously sought after. You know, I love my indie and niche fragrances, but vintage fragrances have a very special place in my heart because they're this, you know, time capsule of the time they were created. The ingredients used, the marketing, the look of the bottle, the smell, the, you know, the fact that you're wearing something different from everyone else. And so even though it's not Patu Pour Homme, which that does something on its own completely beautifully that this does not do, and this does something on its own completely unique and beautiful in a way that Patu Pour Homme doesn't. So they're their own thing, right? But people are eventually going to realize, like, hey, if I can find a bottle of this for 80, 90, 100 bucks, even though it's not hyped, I know I'm getting a quality 80s fragrance from a great perfumer with a great pedigree. They're just going to go buy it. They're just going to go scoop it up. And we're starting to get to that point. I'm starting to see prices on even some of these subdued fragrances start to rise. So I'm not telling you to drop everything, run out and buy as many bottles as you can. I'm just telling you that these sort of under the radar fragrances are slowly becoming more and more into the limelight. You know, people like me do these videos. There are other vintage fragrance aficionados like my brother Rich Mitch across the pond. He will do these videos talking about it. And as word gets out, you know, even if it's a small percentage of the fragrance community, if 1 or 2% go out and start trying to look for this stuff, you're going to see the prices rise. So just a word of caution, while these are still cheap, it might be worth, if you're into the stuff I'm into, grabbing a bottle, because this is one I can recommend and you know, say it is an amazing perfume, and you know, everything that we love is here. The composition, the time spent, you can tell this is not something that was just thrown together. And it's beautiful. It's fantastic. I love wearing stuff like this. So this is the first scent. The second scent from Françoise Caron is another all-time great. And this one is interesting because neither Parfumo or Base Notes actually lists Françoise Caron as the perfumer, but Fragrantica does. So I'm going to go ahead and show this one, but I'm not 100% sure if she was involved. Base Notes actually shows no perfumer. Parfumo shows Akiko Kamai as the perfumer, and Fragrantica shows Akiko Kamai and Françoise Caron as the perfumer. And this is Caron, Le Troisième Homme, or a third man, if you will. And Le Troisième Homme also has this beautiful mixture of lavender with anise and carnation, and oak moss, tonka, patchouli. The note tree actually almost reads like you're reading a note tree of Charles Jourdan Un Homme, but there is a couple very special ingredients in Le Troisième Homme that you're not going to get in Charles Jourdan Un Homme. The biggest of which is you get this amazing clove note, okay? And clove is not a note that's listed in Charles Jourdan Un Homme. So if you are a fan of clove, you know, there's only so many fragrances that do clove well, because the problem with clove is it's very easy to overdose. So you have to have a very deft hand. You have to be very precise when you're using clove in a fragrance. And so this has this spiciness to it because it has this spicy green feel. You get the coriander, you get the citruses at the top, there's bergamot, there's this orange and lemon concoction. It's very beautifully citrus, and the citruses are perfectly, if you've ever seen the box, this is the vintage bottle, by the way. The new bottles come in the normal Caron bottles you've probably seen many a times. I'll show you real quick, just so I can say I showed you. They look like this. This is what the new bottles look like. They have this style, if you will. This, you know, Le Troisième Homme comes in this bottle. And so either or are great. I remember Eugene once saying, I wish someone made a fragrance as Le Troisième Homme or Third Man from Caron, but used higher quality ingredients. He had the modern bottle. He said it feels like the ingredients maybe have been, you know, they're not the best quality. And I said they did make a version like that. It's called the Vintage. That was kind of my joke. But it's half tongue-in-cheek, half joking, half not joking. And you can see this is a tester. So there's no cap on this one, but the cap is, it's just basically this black looking cap that goes in a square here. But the reason I was talking about the packaging is the box has this, if you've ever seen the box, if you go to Parfumo.net and pull up Caron Le Troisième Homme, you will see the box on one of the pictures. And it almost has this, remember the old camera, the old Polaroid ads or whatever, where they had the rainbow of colors, where, you know, you see the reds, the yellows, and it's like a gradient of colors. that is a fantastic representation of this fragrance, because remember how I said the lavender almost feels like it was spliced in Charles Jourdan Un Homme? Like it was like a surgeon came in with a scalpel and spliced the lavender and just put in all of the perfect ingredients of Charles Jourdan Un Homme that we love. You know, the geranium, the cedar, and it was just blended and spliced perfectly. The oak moss, the leather. So here, it's funny because there is actually no leather note listed in Caron's Third Man, okay? But when you first spray, for whatever reason, you're almost hit with this interesting, and maybe I'm the only one that makes this recommendation or this connection, but you're hit with this, it almost feels a little bit like you just sprayed Bel Ami for just 5 seconds, you know, 5-10 seconds. When you spray Third Man, the vintage, it almost feels like you sprayed Bel Ami. And then it goes its own way. It does something completely different from Bel Ami. What's interesting about that little thought is that this came out in 1985, the year I was born. Bel Ami, which I put as my #1 fragrance of all time, that's just my personal preference. For me, that's an 11 out of 10. That's what I feel most comfortable in. You know, it speaks to me every time. There's just something special about that fragrance. You know, some people say Fahrenheit's the best fragrance. Some people say it's Balenciaga Pour Homme. You know, everyone has their own opinion. And how do you define best, right? It's a personal opinion that you've formed over the years of studying and enjoying and wearing fragrances and being in this hobby, right? And so I feel like, you know, the people, when Hermes made Bel Ami, that they used a little bit of Third Man as almost like a reference point to begin the project, and then they went their own way. They went classic Hermes Bel Ami, you know, classic leather, because Hermes is a leather goods company, right? Eau de Hermes was supposed to smell like the inside of a Birkin bag, of a Hermes Birkin bag, which is a leather bag. Very expensive leather bag, but a leather bag. And so Hermes went their own way, but this influenced it, you know, like a planet. This influenced, I think, Bel Ami just a little bit. It gave it a little gravitational pull, if you will. And that's the beauty of this fragrance. The other beauty of this is there's this floral heart that is out of this world. The carnation, the geranium, the rose, they just blend so perfectly with the opening lavender, bergamot, and then you're hit with that spicy clove. And that spicy clove is one of the best clove notes in perfumery. Actually, my other favorite clove fragrance, while we're on the topic, just going off course here, but I will give you a quick example of another fragrance that does clove absolutely beautifully, is this. This is Amouage Bracken Man. This is also a fougere, okay? So if you're into these kind of fragrances from the 80s, like I just talked about from Françoise Caron, these two that she made are, you know, a modern niche fragrance can't compete sometimes with these vintages, but this one does it in its own way, and it's fantastic. So just off topic real quick, because clove is a very hard note to do. Bracken Man does clove in a niche fougere. I mean, look at the fern on the front. And I love Amouage, but I love old Amouage. Someone gave me a hard time because I don't like Xerjoff. I do own a Xerjoff bottle. I own Xerjoff Homme. But someone gave me a hard time because I don't like Xerjoff and I like Amouage. But I like old Amouage. I'm not the biggest fan of what they're doing, you know, modern. I'm going to try and get a sample or a decant of that new Amouage Royal Tobacco and do an early impression for you guys. Okay, so we're 30 minutes in. We've done we've done scent of the day, and we've done one perfumer. So we've got 2 more to go. So let's get a move on it. So next on the list, we are going to do oh no, hang on, I gotta grab one other. Don't go anywhere. Uno momento. Uno momento. Okay. So we're going to do another perfumer whose name is Max Gavari. And Max Gavari has 2 fragrances in my collection that he has perfumed. He also has a son who ended up becoming a perfumer, and his name is Clement Gavari. And, I like the family. They have they have a good outlook on things. Like the son says, each day is a new adventure, creativity, passion, freedom, carpe diem, seize the day. He obviously got a lot of his passion for fragrances from his father. And Max Gavari was born in Grasse, again, the birthplace of perfumery, the birthplace of modern perfumery. And his father and Max Gavari's father was a gardener. So Clement Gavari's grandfather was a gardener in Grasse. And Max Gavari's grandfather was a lavender cultivator and distributor. So they had their hands in the soil, literally, of Grasse. And, being a perfumer was Max Gavari's vocation. He says since his earliest age, I have been passionate by perfumes, and more specifically by the creation of perfumes. It was obvious to me that I had found my way when I became a perfumer. And he does mention, just on a random interview, he created a fragrance called Halloween EDT for women, which I don't own. I do own Halloween Man X, but that's completely different. Same brand though. And he says he has a special tenderness for tuberose, which was used in the creation of Halloween. He says these fragile flowers require special attention when hand-picked, and process needs to be done by night to capture their bewitching scents at their peak. In India, this mythical flower is considered erotic and sensual. So just a little bit about Max Gavari. It was hard to find stuff on some of these perfumers, but Max Gavari is the second perfumer we're going to talk about. And he ended up doing 2. One of which is, I think, one of the most influential perfumes of all time in the masculine world. This is Halston Z14. This is a splash bottle that's made in France that I found. And this is a spray bottle. And both of these are distributed by Halston Fragrances, Inc. So I think there's been multiple iterations of the Halston fragrance, fragrances. And let's see, I'm trying to get it to focus here, but it's not focusing today. Come on, baby. Come on, focus. It's not going to do it. Okay, let's try this one. Let's try the splash. Okay, well, right here it says Halston Fragrances, Paris. And this one actually is made in France. So whenever you try to buy a vintage Halston bottle, the first distributor that you want to find is Parfums Halston, or Halston Fragrances. Parfums Halston or Halston Fragrances is the first distributor you want to go for. If you can't find that, there's another distributor, I think, called Fine French Fragrances, FFF. And FFF, Fine French Fragrances, is the second version that I would probably go for. And then the final version, if you just can't find anything and you just want a bottle, the newest version, I think, is EA, Elizabeth Arden, and that's probably the worst of the bunch. I will tell you some sad news. This is discontinued, believe it or not. Now, this used to be everywhere. In discounters like Ross and TJ Maxx in America, you used to be able to find Halston fragrances. And this fragrance was actually so influential and popular in the 70s and early 80s that the rumor is that this is what the nightclubs and the discotheques smelled of in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't Polo Green. It wasn't Koros. You know, it wasn't Antaeus or anything like that. It was Halston. And the name Z14 is actually the working name. So it was the, you know, code name the company gave it, and they were supposed to give it a real name. But Roy Halston liked it so much that he just said, let's just stick with Z14 and 1-12. And, you know, the legend grew. By the way, if you've never watched the documentary on Roy Halston Frowick, I would highly advise you to go check that out. It's a fantastic documentary on his life. But this fragrance basically inspired a very expensive niche fragrance by Tom Ford called Italian Cypress. And cypress is a very important ingredient in Z14. And Tom Ford has openly said that, you know, this was the scent of his youth. When he was going out and partying when he was young, this is what he wore, Z14. And it made a major impression on him. And so this cypress, citruses with green basil in the opening, and then one of the most alluring cinnamons you will ever smell. The cinnamon in this is unbelievable. So you get this cinnamony, leathery dry down. It just smells like the 70s. You know, it smells like plaid and, you know, patches on your elbows. And it just smells, you know, like the time. And it's an amazing fragrance. I love wearing it. I think it's highly underrated. Maybe now that it's discontinued, it will start to get some of the love and attention that it deserves. But this was created by Max Gavari and Vincent Marcello. And so Max Gavari then went on to create a second fragrance that's in my collection in 94. So big gap, 76 to 94. And in 1994, he created Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme. Now, this is one of my favorite fragrances to wear in summer, spring and summer. And Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme came out in 94. This version is discontinued. They've reformulated it. The one that you want, the one that I would tell you to get, the one that I would be a stickler to tell you to get, is the one that is made in Italy, and it says Euro Italia on the bottom. That's the one that you want. Euro Italia, made in Italy. Anything else, I would probably just pass, honestly. If you can't find this bottle, this particular one is the one you want. Because what ended up happening is Dolce & Gabbana went through, I think, a buyout. Someone else bought them and sold them, and they reformulated the fragrance, and they did not do a good job. The reformulation is not very good, in my opinion. And so you want to go with the made in Italy Euro Italia version. But the brilliance of this fragrance is that it manages to keep this Italian freshness about it. You know, Italians love fresh citrusy fragrances. Think Acqua di Parma Colonia, you know, something like that. Or there are so many examples. But I love the way that the Italians do fresh fragrances. Gianfranco Ferre for Man is another example in this ballpark. Gianfranco Ferre Man, I'm sorry, from the mid-80s. For Men is actually a fragrance from the 2000s that Pierre Bourdon did. But Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme is this amazing, fresh, herbal Italian fragrance that stays fresh, but it brings in these notes underneath. And it manages to play that game of remaining fresh and staying true to what it is, but also, you know, bringing in some heavier notes that don't make the fragrance heavy. That's a very hard job to do. To stay fresh, there's bergamot, orange, there's lavender in here, of course, with spicy cardamom and sage. And there's iris in the base, and I think the iris is the secret ingredient, because everyone knows about the tobacco. The tobacco is, you know, is something that's easily picked out. Although it is a base note, you can tell there's tobacco in it. But it's not a tobacco fragrance to me. It's not like you're buying a real tobacco fragrance. But it's the iris that just smooths everything out, makes it a little bit more powdery. It's 90s iris. It's not Dior Homme iris from the mid 2000s. This is one of my favorite 90s fragrances, period. It's absolutely stunning. And you know I don't like fresh fragrances normally, but I love wearing this stuff. And, you know, it's just sad. It's so hard to find nowadays. But if you can find a bottle of the Euro Italia, you know, Max Gavari put out 2 masterpieces in Z14 and Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme. Okay, so we're going to move on to our final perfumer. And his name is Jean Martel. And Jean Martel only did 5 fragrances in his entire career, okay? Which is unbelievable to me. But I guess back then, you know, there was a lot of tumultuous change going on in the fragrance world. And if you didn't adapt, if you couldn't adapt to what was new, you just kind of got pushed aside. If you stuck to your guns and you wanted to make fragrances the way you wanted to make them, and you weren't trying what the industry wanted you to do, they just kind of, those perfumers just got pushed to the side. And I'm thinking that's what happened to Jean Martel. I don't know for sure, though. I don't know his history, but you know, the fact that he made these 2 absolutely stunning fragrances, and one of them has a very special place in my heart because it is my father's signature scent, and it basically has been my entire life. This fragrance came out in 1973. I was born in 85, and my father has never changed. You know, it is Paco Rabanne Pour Homme for him, and that's it. And there you go. There's the box. Now, there's been like 10 versions of Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, so it's really hard to know. I actually have, this is my backup bottle. So here, I'll show you real quick. This is the box. This is what the old box looked like with the raised R. You can see it's a little bit raised right there, and you'll notice it on the bottle too. So you can see the short ingredient list, which is good enough for me. I know this bottle is probably not super old. I think it's early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but so here's the bottle, and all you have to do, in my opinion, is you want to get a bottle that has the R raised, okay? So if you can get a raised R like this, you know you're getting at least an older bottle. Maybe not the oldest bottle, but an older bottle. And so you can kind of see right here, there are some differences in the bottle. You can see the way that this is an older bottle, I think. If you take a look, the area around the R is black instead of like cream colored, and the 60 milliliter right here is in line with the Paco Rabanne name. And on the newer older bottles, you can see it's a little bit bigger, and it comes out to the side a little bit more. And so either way, though, they're both fantastic fragrances. This is my backup bottle, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm not even going to open the cap of it. I'm just going to leave it. It stays in, it lives in its box for the day when, if I ever have to tap into it. This is the bottle that I use. And the thing about Paco Rabanne Pour Homme is it is an aromatic fougere. It's green. God, the memories with this fragrance are, you know, nothing brings you back to being a kid like smelling your father's fragrance, you know? Unbelievable. It's spicy. It's got this almost like this sweaty clary sage in the top. It has rosemary, one of the best uses of rosemary in my opinion. Someone was asking me, hey, is there, or someone was asking, I think it was on Rich Mitch's, one of Rich Mitch's stream, hey, does anyone know a good rosemary perfume? And this is the only thing I could really think of. I think this is one of the best uses of rosemary, with rosewood, and geranium. It's a true fougere. Geranium, lavender, tonka, oak moss in the base, amber. And what they've done, in the older bottles you get this, in the newer bottles it lost some of its touch. It lost some of the oak moss. It lost some of the heft. It's lighter. You know, it's not as prominent. And in the dry down, you get this beautiful honey that comes out in the old bottles. This honeyed, it's not like a syrupy, sweet, you know, sickly sweet honey. It's like a honey that just kind of works with all the other notes in unison. And as you can see, that's a little bit of a trend in 70s and 80s perfumes. The whole composition, it's about the whole composition, the blend. And this is such a special fragrance for me because, you know, of all of the memories that I have, obviously, with my father. I mean, there's so many, you know, so many weekends, so many trips, so many, you know, time spent together where he would splash this on. He didn't wear perfume. He wore aftershave, okay? So he didn't wear fragrance, but this was his aftershave of choice. And so Paco Rabanne pour Homme, Jean Martel, 1973. And Jean Martel also has a little bit of a DNA. You know, he has a little bit of, he likes this green herbal take, if you will. You know, he likes using thyme and rosemary and tarragon and things like that. Warm spices. And, you know, it even feels like maybe there is a little bit of clove in, I was mentioning clove earlier. It almost feels like maybe there's a slight pinch of clove, although it's not listed in the note breakdown. You get a little bit of that clove-like feel. And you also get a little bit of this tobacco-like feel. Again, it's not listed, but it does give off this little, maybe in the base, you know, maybe just a little bit of tobacco. If that's the case, it really blends with the honey beautifully. I don't know for sure, I'm just guessing, but Paco Rabanne pour Homme, very special fragrance. And then, probably one of the least hyped special fragrances, if you will. I think this fragrance deserves way more talk than what it gets. It is highly underrated, although it is highly sought after nowadays, especially in the older vintage bottle that I'm going to show you. They did a re-release about 5, 6, 7 years ago in the bottle that looks like Dior Higher square bottle. But if you can get the vintage, I would recommend doing that. So this is a vintage bottle of Christian Dior Jules. And Christian Dior Jules is one of the most amazing, spicy, woody leather fragrances you will ever smell. You know, smelling it directly after smelling Paco Rabanne pour Homme, you really get that Jean Martel DNA. And you instantly get that clary sage, that sage opening. Instantly you get that sage opening with both of his creations. And you get this sage, cumin, and tarragon with that lavender. A lot of these perfumers we're talking about love using lavender. And it's done here absolutely beautifully, but lavender is not as much of the star of the show in Jules as it is Paco Rabanne pour Homme. This starts to go down into this dark green leather scent. And so the use of the florals in Jules is beautiful. You get some rose, you get some jasmine, carnation, cyclamen, green basil, one of the most fantastic basil notes I've ever smelled. But then it's all about the base, the oak moss, the leather. There's this leather suede oak moss thing going on in the base. And even though it's not listed, castoreum. Absolutely castoreum in this. Maybe even they use the castoreum to create the leather note. And it is just stunning beyond words. It is one of the best leather scents of all time. You know I said Bel Ami is my favorite, and it absolutely is. But if there is another leather scent from the 80s, if I'm gonna put leather scents on a pedestal from the 80s, this is very close to the top. And Jean Martel deserves much more credit. He didn't do that many creations, but what he did, my God. I mean, if you like that DNA, I would highly encourage you to check out Jules. Try to find a vintage bottle. It did have an amazing advertising campaign, but you get this, I mean, the mixture of the spices and the herbs I talked about, like the sage, there's also, another important note is there's this wormwood note. Okay, so there's this green Artemisia note, which is also one of the best uses of Artemisia I've ever smelled. The Artemisia in Jules is absolutely stunning, and it's mixed with that green basil. And so it's like everything has a partner in this fragrance. You know, the leather has the suede, the Artemisia has the basil, the cumin has the clary sage. They both give off this, you know, a little bit of this sweaty, dirty vibe to it. Everything has a partner. The musk has the jasmine. It's just, I'm sorry, the rose has the jasmine. It's just perfect. You know, everything about this is perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing in this. I absolutely love it. And it made my top 100, obviously. And for a scent that, you know, is the 80s. This kicked off the 1980s. And scents that started to follow in its footsteps that I absolutely love, you started to see stuff like this, like Leonard Porom. This came out in 1980 as well. These two are actually, look at the color of the bottles. They're two peas in a pod. They're both 1980. They kicked off 1980 the proper way. You know what I mean? Just my kind of fragrances through and through. And so if you like my taste, this is one I can also thoroughly stand behind. If you can find a vintage bottle of Jules, you will not be disappointed. It is amazing. And Jean Martel deserves much more spotlight and credit and applause for what he created, for what he did. Influential fragrances to the T. So, Françoise Caron, Max Gavari, and Jean Martel, bravo. Thank you for your contribution to the fragrance world. Thank you guys for watching this video. We kept it under an hour. We got 3 perfumers in. I love highlighting these men and women who have, you know, really put their blood, sweat, and tears into the art of fragrance. And finally, Russian Adam, thank you for creating this beautiful creation. I am loving wearing this today. I feel like a sultan, you know, I feel like a prince wearing this. And I can't wait to talk to you again, my brother. So, thank you very much, everyone. A like, a subscription, a comment always helps. You know, it helps get our name out into the YouTube universe, if you will. The algorithm likes that kind of stuff, but I like that kind of stuff as well. And I will respond to your comments. I love seeing your faces. I love hearing your thoughts and interacting with you. And I love the little tribe that we've created. You know, and that's really what it is. It's a tribe of people who have very similar likes and tastes. And, you know, it's a little bit of a niche. We've carved out a beautiful little niche for ourselves. And so thank you very much, everyone. Cheers. And I'll see you again tomorrow with another video. Bye, guys.